Hello and welcome back to the Haunted Slumber. Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to get comfortable, close your eyes, and let your mind drift. If you're enjoying these tales, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. I'd love to know where you're listening from around the world. Now let the lights dim, the curtain rise, and may this story guide you into a deep, haunted sleep. Beneath the Veil of Alder Glen. It began with a letter written in a trembling hand. Ink faded like the edges of memory. The envelope arrived in late October, slipped beneath the door of the small flat where Elliot Rowe had been living in quiet isolation since the passing of his wife, Marianne. There was no return address, only his name, scrawled in a serif script that felt older than the paper itself. The air was already shifting that week, crisp with autumn decay, as if the world were holding its breath before the sleep of winter. Elliot sat at his kitchen table, the kettle humming low on the stove, and turned the envelope over in his hands. The paper was soft, almost velvety, and it bore the faint scent of pine and damp earth. He opened it slowly, with the solemnity of someone unwrapping a forgotten relic. Asterisk Mr. Rowe, I pray this finds you in fair health. There is a matter concerning the estate at Briar's Hollow which requires your presence. The property, abandoned for many decades, has come into your inheritance by way of your mother's line. You are advised to visit before the first frost. Asterisk. Sincerely, Jonathan Marrow, Solicitor, Marrow and Finch, Dunley, Briar's Hollow. The name meant nothing to Elliot. He had never known his mother's side well. A lineage clouded in superstition, rural estrangement, and, as his father had once put it, the kind of whispering old towns breed like moss on wet stone. The letter, for all its mystery, stirred something deep in Elliot. Not dread, but a subtle pull, like the rustle of wind through curtains in the night. He left the letter on the table, untouched for 3 days, until the kettle's whistle one morning seemed to cry for movement, for some change in the long stasis of his grief. It was a week later when he boarded the morning train to the countryside. The journey was long, the kind that lulled the mind into strange thoughts. Elliot watched the city slip away, replaced by hedgerows and fog-draped fields. As the train pressed north, the land grew quiet, as if sound itself had been left behind in the urban clamor. He arrived at a rural station in Dunley by late afternoon, the sun already dipping behind the hills. There, a man in a long gray coat waited beneath a flickering gas lamp. His name was Marrow, the solicitor, tall and thin, with spectacles like coins and a voice like old linen. I trust your journey was uneventful, Marrow said, and Elliot only nodded. They did not speak much on the ride to Briar's Hollow. The road was winding and narrow, flanked by forests that seemed to lean closer with each mile. The trees were skeletal now, bare-branched, but strangely restless, as though their roots whispered to one another beneath the loam. Eventually, the car slowed and turned down a gravel path, nearly swallowed by the mist that clung to the earth in swirls. The estate loomed ahead, not a grand mansion, but an old farmhouse, large and brooding, with ivy-like veins across its stones. A single lantern flickered above the porch, casting long shadows across the slanted roof and crooked fences. This is the hollow, Marrow murmured, barely above a breath. Inside, the house felt preserved in dust and memory. The air was thick with the scent of dried herbs and something more elusive, the perfume of forgotten rituals. Elliot wandered room by room, touching the banisters worn smooth by unseen hands, the wallpaper peeling like dead skin. There were photographs on the mantel, all black and white, none labeled. Faces stared back at him with the stillness of the grave, their eyes half-shadowed, their expressions unsmiling. A fire had been lit in the main room, and Marrow stood beside it, warming his long fingers. "There's more to your inheritance than bricks and stone," he said, not turning. "The hollow has its history. You'll find it written in dreams and in the hush between footsteps." Elliot frowned. "What exactly do you mean?" But the man only turned then, coat already buttoned. "You'll stay the night, I presume? The hollow isn't meant to be rushed." And with that, Marrow vanished into the dusk, leaving Elliot alone beneath the creaking beams. The first night in Briar's Hollow passed slowly, as though time itself had thickened. Elliot lay in the narrow upstairs bed, listening to the moan of wind in the chimneys, the soft shift of the house as it breathed around him. At some point, he dreamed. He walked the orchard behind the house, though he hadn't seen it yet in waking hours. The trees were leafless and bone-white, their limbs twisting into one another like pleading hands. Among them drifted lights, soft green lanterns, bobbing gently in the fog. He followed them. They led him to a small clearing, where the ground had sunken inward like a shallow bowl. At its center stood a single tree, blackened and split down the middle, as though struck by lightning. Beneath its gnarled roots lay something, a shape unmoving. As Elliot reached for it, the dream dissolved. He awoke at dawn, chilled and breathless. Outside, the mist clung stubbornly to the grass, and the trees beyond the back window swayed with slow purpose. Pulling on a coat, Elliot stepped outside and made his way around the house. There it was, the orchard, just as in his dream. The trees were real, the fog, the silence. But the lanterns were gone, and the clearing at the center was empty. Still, when he knelt and touched the soil, it was warm, and something beneath it shifted, almost imperceptibly. The fog never truly lifted that morning. It lingered like breath on a mirror, dense and low to the earth, swallowing sounds and softening the outline of every tree, stone, and memory. Elliot remained in the orchard far longer than he realized, the kind of stillness that folds time into itself. When he returned to the house, his boots carried the damp scent of turned soil and a strange residue of warmth that seemed to cling to the soles. Inside, the hollow was hushed. No ticking clocks, no birdsong beyond the windows. Just the soft groan of old wood adjusting to the living presence of a man alone. He explored more thoroughly now. The eastern hallway led to a series of unused rooms, an old nursery with moth-eaten curtains, a study lined with water-damaged books, and a locked door at the end with no key in sight. Each space whispered of abandonment, but not neglect. Someone had once kept this place with great care. Elliot could feel it, not just in the arrangement of the furniture or the preserved linens, but in the placement of dried bundles of herbs above every threshold. Bay, rue, and something unfamiliar, waxy and black-veined. On the second floor, a linen closet yielded a hidden staircase behind it, narrow, steep, and almost vertical. Elliot ascended slowly, guided by instinct more than reason, and emerged into a cramped attic space dimly lit by a single round window. There, he found a wooden trunk marked with the letters RAR. He opened it. Inside were journals, brittle with age, their pages marked with careful, slanted handwriting. There were also hand-drawn maps, botanical sketches of root systems, and several pressed plants wrapped in wax paper. One journal stood out, bound in worn green leather, its spine cracked and lined like the surface of dried earth. Elliot opened it to the first page. October 13th, 1882. The lanterns returned last night. 5 this time. Mother stood at the verge and said the soil had softened. I saw the ground ripple like water. Father does not sleep anymore. The entry was unsigned. He flipped through more pages and saw the name Rosalie Rowe appear repeatedly. She had been the last known inhabitant of the Hollow, according to the brief paperwork Marrow had shown him. Rumors of madness, isolation, some incident that closed the estate to public record in 1901. He read on. October 16th. They whisper at the roots. The trees are not trees. They are a boundary. We do not dig past the ring. We do not speak to the shapes at dusk. We carry the lanterns only in silence. October 17th. I woke with soil beneath my nails. The writing grew increasingly erratic after that. Jagged ink, blotched lines, words crossed out. One page was nothing but repeating script. Stay above, stay above, stay above. Elliot closed the book, feeling a strange vibration in his fingertips. Not literal, but a memory, like the echo of sound long past. He looked around the attic again. Dust hung thick in the air, illuminated by the gray light through the round window. Then, just as he was about to leave, he noticed a narrow plank removed from the floorboards near the trunk. Beneath it, a long object had been hidden, wrapped in black velvet and bound with twine. With hesitant hands, Elliot unwrapped it. It was a lantern, old, made of brass and green glass, its design unlike any he had seen. Symbols had been etched into its frame, not decorative but purposeful. It smelled faintly of soil, of petrichor, and something older. When he held it up, the glass glowed faintly, not from within, but as if remembering light. That night, the Hollow felt more awake. The air held an expectancy, a silence that wasn't emptiness but attention. Elliot sat by the fire in the main room, Rosalie's journal open in his lap. Outside, the orchard was veiled again, but a single light shimmered through the trees, a lantern bobbing slowly in the fog. He stood, heart heavy but unafraid, and took the brass lantern from the mantel. It was cold in his hand, but the glass warmed as he stepped onto the porch. The orchard awaited. The fog parted before him like curtains, and the lantern's green glow pulsed gently, almost breathing. As Elliot walked deeper, the shapes of trees emerged, pale, gnarled, the tips of their roots curling above the soil like fingers. The earth beneath his feet felt soft. He reached the clearing once more, the bowl-shaped hollow with the split tree at its center. Tonight, 6 lanterns drifted in a slow circle around it, like mourners at a vigil. Their light did not dispel the darkness, only held it at bay. Elliot stepped closer. The soil within the hollow was disturbed, not freshly dug, but not untouched either. He could feel the pull again, the deep thrum beneath the ground, not a sound, but a rhythm. And as he knelt, lantern in hand, the wind around him died entirely. Stillness, then the whisper, It came from everywhere and nowhere, not language but suggestion. Shapes moved in the corners of his sight, not threatening but present, a sense of being observed. Elliot set the lantern down at the base of the tree and placed his hand on the bark. It was cold, almost wet, and pulsing faintly. A memory surfaced, sudden and vivid. His mother, humming a tune he hadn't remembered in years. A lullaby, a soft chant. Her hands weaving herbs above his crib. The smell of bay and rue. And a voice, hers, speaking gently. You must never go to the orchard at dusk, my love. There are things that remember you there. He pulled back, shaken, breath shallow. The lanterns around him began to flicker. Then, without warning, the earth beneath the tree opened, not with violence, but with a slow parting, like a mouth yawning after a long silence. Elliot froze. From within, something began to rise. Not a creature, not flesh, but memory. A form made of root and mist and whisper. It had the outline of a woman, tall and veiled, her hands folded in prayer. Her face was hidden by draping strands of moss and hair. She looked at him, not with eyes, but with the totality of presence. And then she spoke, not aloud, not with words, but Elliot understood. The hollow remembers. The soil sings. You have returned to the verge, and it is time. The figure of memory, or root, or something Elliot could not name, stood in still communion with the night and its ghosts. Her presence did not radiate fear, but gravity, a pull inward, downward, into memory and place, like an anchor dropped in deep waters. The lanterns circling the hollow dimmed, flickered, then settled into a low, constant glow, casting halos that shimmered on the surface of the split tree's bark. Elliot's breath slowed. His heartbeat, once thunder, now mimicked the hush around him. He didn't know how long he stood there. Time became viscous, dreamlike. The green glow of his lantern gently pulsed beside him, and in the distance, something moved among the trees, not a body, but a rhythm, as if the orchard itself was shifting, turning its attention. Then the figure before him began to fade. Not dissolve, not vanish, but retreat like steam curling back into earth. And as she lowered into the opening at the tree's base, the split sealed behind her. Moss crept quickly over the seam, swallowing all signs she had ever emerged. The hollow returned to silence. Elliot stared at the place where she had stood. In her absence, the air felt heavier, as though every atom remembered her and longed for her return. Then he saw something in the dirt. Half buried beneath where the woman's root-like feet had pressed into the earth was a small, ivory-colored token, a pendant, oval in shape, etched with the same runes that lined the lantern's brass frame. He brushed it clean and pocketed it without thought. When Elliot turned back toward the house, the orchard had changed. The path he had followed had lengthened. Trees he didn't recall now towered along his left. The fog was thinning, but the land beneath it seemed subtly altered, as if the ground itself had shifted while he was standing still. The hollow greeted him like a patient creature watching from every window. That night, sleep was fragile and thin. He drifted in and out of strange dreams, Rosalie's journal lying open in the attic, the flicker of lanterns beneath the floorboards, the hum of roots growing with impossible speed. Once he dreamed he was buried alive, but not in fear, or rather, he lay under the earth as if swaddled, listening to the voices of the soil like a lullaby. In the morning, the pendant he had found was resting on his chest, though he had placed it on the kitchen table. He began to understand that the hollow was not haunted in the ordinary sense. It was alive, not malevolent, not kind, but attentive. Like a field watching its own boundaries, aware of the footsteps of those who crossed it. As the days passed, Elliot mapped the orchard. It was larger than he remembered, stretching deep behind the house and curling around in strange, non-linear paths. He found rings of stones sunken into the moss, small bone totems hanging from tree limbs, and an area where the air was unnaturally cold despite the warm season. In one part of the orchard, the western edge, the trees grew in a perfect circle. At the center was a stone slab, flat and unmarked. Elliot sat there often, listening. The longer he stayed, the more he began to sense patterns beneath the silence, as if the wind carried half-formed words or the branches murmured when his back was turned. He began to read Rosalie's journal aloud, not because he needed to, but because he felt compelled, as if the house was listening and the words might stir old memories into rising. One entry held his attention. October 21st. There is a field beyond the orchard that no map shows. I found it by accident or perhaps by invitation. It is quiet there. The wind does not touch it. Things buried do not rot. I call it the sleep field. There, the soil does not forget. The sleep field. He had not seen it yet. That night, he dreamed again. This time, he was walking through the orchard in winter. All the trees were bare, and each branch held a single lantern, still and unlit. The snow was shallow, and beneath it, faint outlines of faces stared upward, not corpses, but impressions, as if the land remembered every person who had ever stood upon it. He awoke before dawn with frost on the inside of his bedroom window. Elliot set out before sunrise. The orchard greeted him in silver fog, the kind that glowed faintly from within, as though lit by its own breath. He carried the brass lantern, now cold again, and moved deeper than he had before, past the ring of stone, past the gnarled trees with hollow knots. At the far edge, where the orchard gave way to scrub, he found it. The sleep field. It was a wide clearing bordered by low walls of tangled root and vine, perfectly round, as if the land had bowed inward. The grass was gray, soft like ash, and at its center rose a tree unlike the others, tall, pale, and leafless, its branches reaching not outward, but down. Beneath it, a circle of lanterns sat unlit, half buried in the ground. Elliot knelt. The soil was warm. He placed his hand to the earth and felt a slow, deep rhythm, not unlike a heartbeat, but older. A rhythm of memory. The pendant in his pocket hummed faintly. Then he saw the figure. At the far edge of the field stood a woman, or something wearing the shape of one, her silhouette cloaked in trailing black leaves. She raised her hand slowly, palm opened. Elliot did not run. He stepped forward. The wind died. The lanterns around the tree flickered to life, green and cold. He entered the sleep field completely. The grass of the sleep field did not part under Elliot's steps, but yielded like shallow water. There was no rustle, no break of sound, only the soft hush of breath and the low hum of something just below the edge of perception. The woman, if that shape could still be called that, remained at the border, motionless, her hands still lifted as if holding an invisible thread between them. Elliot passed the ring of half-buried lanterns, each glowing with a steady green light that flickered when he drew close. The tree in the center loomed tall and quiet, its pale bark smooth as bone. It did not bear leaves, but its branches swayed as if stirred by breath rather than wind, deep, silent, and slow. He stepped close and placed his palm against the bark. Warm, a memory opened, not his own, not fully formed. The scent of apples rotting in a cellar. A voice singing in a dialect older than language. A child's laughter echoing inside an attic where no footsteps led. Then silence again. From the pocket of his coat, the pendant pulsed gently. The woman began to walk the perimeter, her movement slow and unhurried. Elliot did not move, only turned to watch her as she circled. With each step she took, the fog shifted, parting slightly to reveal outlines in the field, depressions in the earth, subtle as breath. They were graves, but unmarked, unsealed. Memory plots, not filled with remains, but impressions, like old roots that once belonged to bodies now part of the soil. And all the while, above and between them, the lanterns floated low, not tethered, not hung. They drifted like slow stars, each casting a different intensity. Some flickered as though remembering grief, others dimmed as if mourning something still unfolding. Elliot realized they were not merely lights. They were keepers. He spoke, though he did not know why. "Who are they?" The woman's form paused across from him. The sound of her voice did not rise from her mouth, but from the earth itself, as though the field had chosen to answer through her. "They are what the hollow remembers." Elliot stepped nearer. "And who are you?" "I am its veil," she said. "Its witness, its shape in your dream." She raised her hand once more, and one of the floating lanterns drifted toward Elliot. It hovered before him, casting a warm green glow that reached into his skin. Inside, shapes moved, shadows, images. A house in flames, a woman weeping beneath a tree, an orchard covered in snow, and a boy running through it all. He recognized the boy. It was him, but not from this life, from one before. Elliot staggered backward, breath caught in his throat. The woman, the witness, continued. "This place remembers all who have walked it. Each footfall, each grief, each whisper left in dreams. It keeps the shape of every sorrow." Elliot looked around. The field was full. Though silent, it thrummed with presence. Not souls, perhaps, but impressions. A repository of memory far older than his own lifetime. "Why me?" he asked. The wind stirred, just once. "Because you were always meant to return." He sat at the base of the tree as dusk fell. The lanterns now hovered in a wide circle, their glow steady, forming a perimeter of quiet attention. The woman sat beside him, her presence both companion and question. "You once buried something here," she said without turning. "I don't remember. Not with your mind, but your body does. Your breath does. The hollow does." He closed his eyes. He remembered running, not away, but toward. A tree aflame in the dusk. The sound of something splitting in the earth. A lullaby sung from underground. A field filled with ash and lilies. A girl's voice, Rosalie's voice. "You said I would always find you." He opened his eyes. The woman was gone. Later that night, Elliot found himself back at the farmhouse, though he could not remember walking there. His boots were clean. The lantern still glowed. He placed it on the mantel. The house exhaled, a soft settling of wood and shadow. He felt it then, not fear, not anxiety, but a kind of anchored grief, the deep-rooted kind that grows beneath generations. The hollow was not haunted by spirits, but by repetition, by the shape of stories lived over and over, folded into soil and memory. He walked through the room slowly. In the attic, the journal waited, its pages now slightly different, written in Rosalie's hand, but containing things he had not read before. Lines like, "There are places that grow memory like fruit. When it ripens, someone must return to gather it." And, "I left the light for you. You'll know it by its color." He returned to the orchard. At its center, where the stone ring had once stood, A new lantern now flickered, green, yes, but warmer now, as though touched by something deeply personal. He picked it up. Inside, a vision. The girl, Rosalie, walking away from the hollow, her braid flicked by wind. Elliot, younger, reaching after her. Words spoken in the orchard. "We are not done yet." He would stay, not as a prisoner, not even as a guardian, but as a participant. The hollow required not a keeper, but a listener, and Elliot had always been good at listening. He sat beneath the orchard's central tree again, the grass warm beneath him, and listened to the wind through dead branches, to the low thrum of memory, to the unspoken lullabies of the field. Above him the lanterns circled. In the soil roots stirred, and in the spaces between silence, a story older than words began again. The days no longer passed with clarity. There was no sunrise, no nightfall, only gradients of light and dim, moments unfolding like petals in mist. Time in the hollow had softened, and Elliot had begun to feel its texture like fog against skin, not linear, but ambient, pulled in corners and folded in walls. The farmhouse had changed. He noticed it subtly at first, a shift in the placement of a window, a mirror that hadn't been there before, rimmed in ivy and showing not his reflection but the orchard's heart. Books on the shelf he hadn't brought, some titled, others blank, but each heavy with presence. They smelled of damp earth and candle smoke. Elliot read them slowly, absorbing not information but emotion. Each page bore a residue of someone else's memory, fragments of old lives, feelings like pressed flowers, brittle and perfumed with sorrow. In one book, a woman described the act of burying her voice in a tin box beneath the house. In another, a man wrote in loops and spirals, confessing that he could only dream in lantern light. None of them signed their names, yet Elliot recognized them as neighbors. Not literal, but kindred. Those who had once listened as he now did. He began to speak less. Words felt heavy, too sharp against the softness of the place. Instead, he moved with ritual. He walked the orchard at the same hour each day, or what passed for day, touching each tree, whispering a name. Sometimes the trees whispered back. Their voices were not in sound, but in breath, in scent, in flickers of light among the bark. Some bore scars. One bled sap that smelled of rosemary. Another leaned toward him as if listening with its whole body. The lanterns continued their silent patrol. They were not guardians, but watchers, archivists of unspoken truths. Elliot would sometimes sit beneath one and listen, and for a moment he would remember things not his own. A cold hallway in a stone hospital, a boy hiding beneath stairs, a field filled with broken glass that rang like bells in wind. Each vision left behind a subtle ache, but it was a quiet ache like nostalgia without origin. The cellar door beneath the farmhouse had once been locked, but now it stood ajar. Elliot descended. The air was cool and smelled of lichen and dust. The walls were thick stone, mortared with something black and old. Along the floor were glass jars, each containing something small, a fingernail, a lock of hair, scraps of parchment written in looping script. At the far end, a niche in the wall held a single lantern, unlit, wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it. Unlike the others, this one was shaped like a heart. Not metaphorically, it pulsed gently in his hand like something alive. Its glow was not green, but a faint amber like the sun seen through shut eyes. He carried it upstairs. The moment he crossed the threshold into the main room, the farmhouse shuddered. Not violently, not in fear, but as if awakening. Rooms realigned. The parlor stretched deeper than before, and a new door revealed itself, narrow, arched, sealed with ironwood. Elliot placed the heart lantern upon a small table nearby, and the door opened soundlessly. Beyond it, a stairwell made of spiraled stone, leading down not into darkness, but into memory. He understood now what the hollow truly was, not haunted in the traditional sense. It was not the dead that lingered, but the echo of moments too profound to vanish, the quiet griefs, the half-finished lullabies, the promises whispered at deathbeds. These things rooted into the soil, into wood, into breath. The hollow was a sanctuary of such things. It had called him not to solve or to undo, but to listen. He spent days, or the timeless semblance of days, exploring the new wing beneath the house. Corridors lined with doors that opened into recollections not his own, a child's room with wooden toys worn smooth by ghostly hands, a kitchen where someone once prepared broth while waiting for a mother who never returned, a library of blank books, waiting to be written by those brave enough to remember. In one room, a cradle rocked on its own. In another, a violin played one long, single note held eternally. None of it was frightening, only solemn, only still. He wrote letters he never sent. He drew maps of the orchard that shifted each time he glanced away. He began to leave offerings by the lanterns, rosemary, bone, folded paper birds, not because he was told to, but because it felt right. The lanterns began to respond, dimming or glowing brighter depending on the gift. He realized this was dialogue, a conversation held in silence. One evening, a voice whispered from the field. Not the woman, a child. Have you found the name? Elliot stepped into the orchard. The fog parted just slightly, and he saw a figure seated at the base of the central tree. A boy, no more than 10, eyes reflecting lantern light. I don't know what it is, Elliot said gently. It's yours, said the boy, but not the one they gave you. The hollow remembers your first one. The wind moved through the orchard like a sigh. Find it, the boy said, or you'll fade. Later, Elliot sat by the fire, holding the amber lantern. He spoke aloud just once. I remember a well, and I remember falling, but I don't remember if I ever hit the bottom. The lantern flickered, and for a moment, the farmhouse's walls softened, became translucent, revealing behind them layers of lives. 1,000 shadows living, sleeping, breathing in tandem. Some danced, some wept. All were echoes, all were witnesses. And in that moment, Elliot no longer feared the hollow. He was part of it now. He always had been. It was in the hush between lantern flickers, the moment when Elliot's breath misted into the chilled air of the cellar staircase, that he noticed the floor had changed. Stone, once smooth and predictable, had become something older, lined with faint carvings. Not writing, but growth rings like those in trees. Spirals within spirals, they tracked outward across the stone like ripples from a dropped leaf, and he knew without knowing why. These were not man-made. They were grown. Beneath the farmhouse, beneath even the listening rooms and memory corridors, was something deeper still. A foundation rooted not in brick, but in something ancient and breathing. Pulsed faintly. It hummed. He returned the next day, or the semblance of one, with the heart lantern in hand, its amber glow steady as a heartbeat. It seemed to know the way, pulling gently toward a crack in the wall he had not previously seen. Ivy veiled its edges, brittle and brown, but as the lantern passed near, the vines pulled back like curtain cords. Behind them, a descending tunnel, spiraling not into darkness, but into memory. There was no turning back now. The moment he stepped inside, the world above grew quiet, distant, as if wrapped in velvet. Even the air changed thicker, fragrant with peat and rain. The walls glistened with moisture. Small blossoms, translucent and slow-moving, swayed from root-like tendrils along the stone. They whispered softly as he passed. Not words, names. He heard them as sensations. Not syllables, but emotional resonances. Joy at being held, grief at a door closing, awe at the sound of bells across water. These names had not been spoken aloud in years, perhaps centuries. But here in the lantern route they endured. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, naturally formed, its ceiling lost in mist. Elliot gasped. Dozens of lanterns floated freely here, not green or amber, but in hues he had no words for. The blue of forgetting, the red of a mother's final lullaby, the white of silence between thunderclaps. They moved like jellyfish, tendrils trailing faint glows, weaving among vast, petrified roots that curled up from the floor like ancient ribs. At the center of the space, a singular root reached upward, immense and coiled, encasing something within its twisted embrace. A shape, a figure, sleeping. Elliot approached slowly. The heart lantern pulsed in sync with whatever lay inside. Its light seemed to harmonize with the figure's own, barely visible through the layers of root, yet undeniably human. A woman, long-haired, eyes closed, mouth parted in a breath never exhaled. He did not recognize her, yet he wept. The tears came not from fear or sorrow, but from recognition without logic. The sense of home found suddenly in the deep, the sensation of being remembered by something greater than time. Around the root space were objects, keepsakes, tokens, offerings. A child's shoe, a lock of red hair braided with ribbon, a bird's skull painted with gold. Each bore a name etched in the hollow tongue. Not spoken language, but feeling. When Elliot touched one, he felt its owner's last memory bloom in his mind like a night flower. Their breath, their fear, their small, defiant hope. "She's the seed," a voice said from behind. He turned. The boy was there again, fog-clad and still, eyes pale as frost. She listens. She remembers, but she forgets her own name. Every 100 years or so, someone comes to try and speak it aloud. "Has anyone ever succeeded?" Elliot asked. The boy smiled, a slow, sad thing. "They speak what they think is her name, but it's always their own." Elliot sat by the lantern root for a long time. He spoke not in words, but in thoughts. He offered no grand truths, no demands, only presence. Only the slow letting go of what he had once clung to. The ache of needing to matter, the weight of unanswered questions, the fear of vanishing without legacy. And in that stillness, something shifted. The figure in the root stirred. Her eyes remained closed, but her mouth curved, the faintest trace of a smile, like wind brushing wheat. A vine reached from the base, wrapped once around Elliot's wrist, then released. The amber lantern dimmed. He understood. He ascended the tunnel not as the same man, but as an echo carried upward. When he returned to the orchard, the trees leaned toward him. The lanterns did not patrol, but gathered near, floating quietly in reverence. The farmhouse windows burned brighter, not with fire, but with warmth, a glow that welcomed, not warned. The field beyond the orchard had changed too. No longer empty, no longer fallow. Dozens of silhouettes moved slowly among the mist, not haunting, but remembering. People, echoes, dreamers. Some were transparent, others fully solid. None spoke aloud, but each turned toward Elliot with quiet acknowledgement, as if he had done what he was meant to do, not to solve, not to escape, but to be still, to bear witness, to offer presence without condition. That night he lit no fire. He sat on the farmhouse porch, heart lantern beside him, and watched the orchard breathe. The trees swayed gently, the lanterns pulsed with calm rhythm, and far below, beneath root and memory, the listening woman dreamed on, no longer alone. Elliot closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he slept without fear. The days that followed, if they could still be called days, became a tapestry of quiet rituals. Elliot no longer marked time with clocks or meals. The orchard dictated its own rhythm. The waxing and waning of fog, the subtle shifts in color beneath the leaves, the way lanterns dimmed or brightened in response to thought, not sunlight. The world outside Briar Hollow had dissolved, or perhaps retreated, and in its place was this strange pocket of memory suspended in gentle stillness. The farmhouse, once a shell, became a home. Its halls remained mysterious. Some doors opened to familiar spaces, others to fleeting glimpses of rooms Elliot had never entered. One led to a parlor filled with books bound in bark and moss. Another, a nursery where wooden mobiles turned slowly in the absence of wind. And one door, the one nearest the hearth, opened only at dusk, revealing a room where rain fell eternally in silence, never soaking the floor, never ceasing. He began to learn the language of the hollow. Not spoken, not written, but something between intention and intuition. The trees responded to emotion, bending toward joy, retreating from unease. The lanterns, once impassive watchers, became gentle companions, drifting near when he grew tired, offering their soft radiance like company. He would walk the orchard now with unhurried steps, listening, and sometimes, in that deep, windless quiet, the orchard whispered back. He heard them clearest near the western edge, where the trees grew oldest and closest, their roots visibly entwined above the earth like clasped hands. It was there he first noticed the watcher tree. Unlike the others, it bore no lanterns. Its bark was silvery black, like scorched mirror, and its trunk split into 3 distinct spires, each curved slightly inward as if in silent counsel. Beneath it, the earth gave off warmth, a pulse like breathing. He knelt there once, letting his fingers trail over the tangled roots, and something opened inside him. Not a voice, but a story. A girl. Long ago, or perhaps not long at all, time had lost meaning here. She wandered the orchard in grief. A family lost. A house abandoned. She walked until her feet bled, until her voice gave out, and still she walked, calling a name she no longer remembered the meaning of. She carried nothing but a broken lantern and a handful of bones wrapped in cloth. It was the hollow that answered her, not with comfort, not at first, but with silence. And then, when she knelt at the roots of this tree, with surrender in her breath and sorrow in her bones, the orchard listened. It opened, and she was never seen again. Elliot blinked, breath shallow, as the vision faded. The watcher tree stood unchanged, but something about the air had thickened, not hostile, but charged, as if it waited. Was she the first? He asked aloud. The wind offered no answer, but the lanterns in the distance dimmed, pulsing once. Not the first, not the last, only a thread in the weave. That night, Elliot dreamed of the girl. She stood at the edge of the mist, lantern cradled in one hand, a red ribbon braided into her hair. Her eyes were not pleading, nor empty, but resolute, as if she had made peace with something Elliot had yet to name. She reached toward him, not to touch, but to offer. In her hand was a seed, black, round, warm to the touch. When he took it, the dream folded inward like a closing petal, and he awoke with the shape still in his palm. Real, small, breathing. He planted it the next morning in the orchard's heart, beneath the hollow arch of two converging trees. The earth parted easily, as if it had waited for the seed. As soon as it was covered, the fog around him stirred, not with wind, but with memory. Faces drifted in the mist, not solid, not fully formed, but flickering with familiarity. A boy clutching a wooden toy spinning in place. An old man singing to no one, voice carried on fog. A mother, her hands stained with berry juice, kneeling in tall grass. All paused, noticing him. All nodded, faint and slow. Something had been accepted. Not just the seed, but the intention behind it. Elliot began to feel them more clearly now. The echoes that moved among the trees. Not ghosts in the traditional sense, but fragments. Embers of lives once lived, longed for, or imagined. They did not speak, but communicated through presence. A sense of calm, of gratitude, of distant sorrow. And among them, always watching, always near the edges, the girl. Her lantern now glowed with green-gold light. Her smile no longer held pain. One evening, as the orchard slipped into a deep silver twilight, Elliot heard a song, soft, wordless, like wind through reeds. He followed it past the watcher tree, through a part of the orchard he had not yet explored, where the trees leaned so tightly together that only a narrow path remained. And at the path's end stood an arch of roots, glowing faintly with moss and starlight. He stepped through without fear, and found himself on the edge of the sea. The shoreline was black stone and pale grass, waves moving without sound. In the distance stood a structure, part lighthouse, part chapel, built from driftwood and coral, its windows lit by flickering flame. Lanterns hung from skeletal trees along the cliffside, swaying despite the still air. The girl stood at the shoreline, gazing at the water. When she turned, she did not speak. She simply gestured toward the sea. Elliot walked to her side, the hush wrapping around him like a shawl. Together they watched the tide retreat. And there, for a fleeting moment, in the wet sand left behind, a face. Not human, not monstrous, a face like stone shaped by memory. It looked at him, then vanished. The girl placed her lantern at his feet. His glow faded. She stepped into the sea, never sinking, just dissolving like mist at dawn. Elliot remained, watching the last ripple fade. And in that moment, he understood. The hollow did not consume. It returned. What was lost, scattered by grief or time or fear, could be gathered again, not to restore the past, but to make it whole in another way, to plant it, to listen, to let it dream. The return to the farmhouse was not a return at all. After the shoreline, after the face in the sand and the girl's fading lantern, the orchard seemed altered not visibly but in feel. Where once it had whispered and observed, now it watched with something like recognition. The lanterns glowed with a deeper hue, like memory steeped in dusk. The trees bowed ever so slightly when Elliot passed, their limbs crackling faintly in the still air. And somewhere in the soil beneath, something stirred. Not with malice, but awakening. Elliot began to dream more vividly, dreams that were not his own. A child barefoot in moonlight, wandering hallways of a home that breathed with ivy and wood smoke. A woman stitching names into linen, humming songs in a language Elliot didn't know but somehow understood. An old man in a root cellar, staring up through cracks in the floorboards, whispering apologies to the ghosts above. Each night, another life. Another whisper of the orchard's tapestry. One morning, Elliot awoke to find a door in the farmhouse that had not been there before. It stood in the hallway near the old piano where dust had once hung thick in the still air. The door was painted blue, a color so vivid it looked wet, and it bore a handle of knotted rope as though salvaged from a shipwreck. It pulsed with a low warmth, and a scent drifted from behind it, loam, rust, and lavender. He opened it without hesitation. Inside, a staircase leading down into dark earth. He descended slowly, the steps soft with moss. The walls around him seemed to breathe, not with sound, but with pressure, like lungs beneath soil. Faint glimmers of bioluminescent lichen painted the way, pulsing gently with each of his footsteps. And below, after what felt like an hour's descent, he stepped into a chamber that should not have existed. It was vast, domed like the underside of a hill, the ceiling webbed with roots and threads of silver moss. In the center stood a house, a replica of the farmhouse above, but smaller, impossibly intricate, carved entirely from bone whitewood and pale stone. The windows glowed faintly from within. Elliot approached, breath shallow. The air hummed. He knelt before the miniature door and, compelled not by curiosity but a deep and aching trust, touched it. The chamber blinked. Not literally, but like an eye adjusting to sudden brightness. And Elliot was inside. The rooms were the same: kitchen, parlor, narrow staircase, attic with slanted ceiling, but everything was touched by time and distortion as though shaped by emotion more than architecture. A cradle rocked gently despite the stillness. Mirrors showed reflections not of Elliot, but of those who had walked here before, hundreds of lives, flickering like candlelight. In the hearth, no fire burned, only ash. But within the ash lay shapes. Names carved from bone. He reached toward them and felt the echo of voices, not speech, but intention. Love, grief, release. This was the house beneath the orchard. A reliquary, a vessel. Every whisper above, every lantern hung, every lost thread of memory, it ended here. Not entombed, not buried. Held, gently, eternally. He sat there for what might have been hours or days, letting it speak through silence, letting it name him without sound. And when he rose, the door behind him had vanished. Only the way forward remained, a path through the far wall of the chamber, lined with stones that glowed with breath light, leading deeper still. He followed. The path led to water, a still black pool so perfectly reflective it looked like open sky beneath the earth. At its center, a single stone platform, and upon it, a lantern unlike any he'd seen. Taller than Elliot himself, forged not of glass and wood but of bone, vine, and old iron. It was lit, its flame white as milk, silent as snow. He waded into the water, it parted for him. No chill, no resistance, just invitation. When he reached the platform and placed a hand on the lantern, he saw everything. Not as a sequence, not as a story, but as a truth. The hollow was not haunted. It was the haunting. A place made from grief refined into stillness, sorrow softened into soil, memory woven into mist. Not a prison, not a curse. A resting place. A seedbed for lost things. It had drawn him here not to consume, but to complete. He was not the first. He would not be the last. But he was necessary. A steward. A listener. A voice for the silence. When he emerged, the farmhouse was quiet. The orchard breathed, and a new lantern hung at the gate, white and still, waiting for the next dreamer to follow the path. Elliot stood beneath the stars that night, not looking outward, but downward toward the roots, the bones, the dreaming house. And he smiled. The wind was quiet now, no longer whispering through the dead fields, but sitting heavy in the hollows like breath held too long. Evangeline stood at the gate of the drowned orchard, the threshold she had once passed unknowingly, her lantern casting a trembling ring of light onto the earth. Beyond the twisted arch of bone-white branches, the world turned inward, darker, softer, suffocating. The roots had risen further overnight. They curled like fingers around the stones of old walls and split the path into furrows. Faces of the forgotten dead seemed to shimmer beneath the soil, lips moving without sound, eyes blinking slowly in the greenlit dark. The lanterns above those eerie, ghostlit spheres floated lower now, as if guiding her or warning her. It was hard to know which. She walked slowly, her thoughts distant, as if drawn forward not by choice but by gravity. Behind her, the house had collapsed upon itself in silence, its walls rotted into mush, its windows swallowed by ivy and frost. Nothing waited for her back there now. Only this remained, the orchard, the veil, the truth she had almost touched in dreams. Each step took her deeper into memory. The trees whispered and their voices were familiar. Her grandmother's lullabies, her mother's broken songs. That echo from the radio left on in the attic. All of it fused into a single thread, woven into the fog that wound about her ankles. At the heart of the orchard stood the altar. Not a man-made thing, but something older, a low mound of earth ringed by bones and half-buried offerings, dolls made of straw and cloth, iron nails wrapped in hair, shards of mirror sealed with wax. Atop it, a mask of bark and teeth smiled down at her, and behind it rose the hollow tree, the first tree, the one that grew where the girl was buried when the village was still ash and shadow. It pulsed faintly, a green, wet glow in its veins. Evangeline knelt, not because she was told to, but because her limbs refused defiance. The orchard accepted her presence. The roots drew back slightly. The mist curled about her shoulders like a shawl. She placed the lantern upon the altar. The flame inside flared white, then extinguished, and with it the orchard exhaled a long, slow breath. All was silent. She closed her eyes. In the dream, or perhaps the space beyond it, she stood at the edge of a wide lake. On its surface floated candles made of bone, each cradling a single memory. She saw them, her father's final walk into the woods, her mother watching the wind with eyes full of dread, herself, small and afraid, holding the family photo that would later crumble to dust. The trees here did not grow upward but downward, their branches clawing the lake's surface like the fingers of sleepers trying to escape dreams. And above, the sky was not sky at all, but mirror. "You know now," the voice said. Not from behind. Not ahead. Inside her. She nodded. "Will you carry it back?" Evangeline turned, and the orchard shimmered around her. The mist peeled back like curtain from stage. The bones and soil were no longer decaying, but pulsing with breath. Not death. Not life. Continuance. "I will," she said. The voice faded like tide. She woke beneath the hollow tree. The altar was empty. The lantern gone. Her hands were stained with soil and frost. But the fear was gone too. In its place, a hush. The orchard was quiet as she rose. No ghostly lights. No faces in the roots. Only wind rustling. Evangeline left the orchard slowly, barefoot now, her steps quiet. When she emerged into the fields, dawn had begun to brush the horizon, soft gold slicing through the gray. She paused, looked back. Nothing but trees. Ordinary, barren trees. No fog. No mask. Just silence. But she carried the knowing now. In her marrow. In the quiet between heartbeats. She would return to the village. Not to warn. Not to weep. But to remember. Some stories were not meant to be understood. Only kept. And in keeping them, the hollow wind would never rise again.